All right, we are Hebrews 3. Hebrews 3, verse 9 is where we are, but we'll back up to verse 8 just to get a context. Hebrews 3, verse 8. He says, "Harden not your hearts, as in the provocation, in the day of temptation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness." I missed one word that messed that all up. Harden not your hearts, as in the provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness. Our new verse. When your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. So now, of course, obviously, he's made it clear. He's talking about what happened with the Jews coming out of Egypt and going through the wilderness. He says, what they did was they tempted me. Tempted me. Not tempting him to sin. They were begging him to do something he didn't want to do. That is, kill him. That's what they were doing. They said, I wish we had died in Egypt. And he said, just careful what you're wishing for. I'll kill you right where you stand. And he ended up doing it. The problem was, this is all boiled down to a problem with the heart. He said in verse 8, harden not your hearts. A hard heart will lead to bad actions. The heart's got to remain pliable and soft. Exodus 8, verse 15. Exodus 8, verse 15. I say a hard heart is Egyptian. At the beginning of the Bible, he set up Egypt as the counterpart for wickedness. Exodus 8, verse 15. But when Pharaoh saw that there was respite, that is, God had eased up a little bit, he hardened his heart and hearkened not unto the Lord, as the Lord had said. And God had told Moses, I know Pharaoh, here's the way he's going to act. And that's exactly what happens. It seems like anytime we get a little bit of leniency, the heart wants to run ahead of God. And instead of, I've found this to be true. Usually mercy given is not reciprocated. When you're merciful to someone who doesn't deserve it, usually what happens is they continue and get harder and harder in rebellion, as we saw with Pharaoh. Look at it in 1 Samuel 6. 1 Samuel 6, verse 6. 1 Samuel 6, 6. Samuel's telling off on him. He says, wherefore then do you harden your hearts, as the Egyptians and Pharaoh hardened their hearts, when he had wrought wonderfully among them? Did they not let the people go, and they departed? He said right here, don't start acting like Pharaoh in Egypt. And the identifier for Pharaoh in Egypt was this, a hard heart. He says in 2 Kings 17, 2 Kings 17, 14. Pretty soon, and it's happened with the church, if the heart doesn't stay soft and humble and pliable before God, what happens is the heart becomes just like the rest of the world. And you've seen the church do this. As the world moves more and more wicked, so does the church. Now, they're not the very same wicked, but they're saying in progress. 2 Kings 17, verse 14. Notwithstanding, they would not hear, but hardened their necks, like to the necks of their fathers, that did not believe in the Lord their God. A hard heart says, I will have this outcome or that outcome, and determine it. And he called it here hard neck, stiff necked. Look at it in Nehemiah 9, verse 16. Here they're confessing their sin. This is almost a re-prayer like Daniel does when he prays for the nation. Nehemiah 9:16. But they and our fathers dealt proudly and hardened their necks and hearkened not to thy commandments. So it's a dueling authority. God has commandments. Man wants to come up with his own. That's what Jesus confronted when he came to earth. Is he said, look, y'all have got this Babylonian Talmud, and you're producing these things, and you're making that the commandments, and by doing that, you void out the commandments of God. in Daniel 5, verse 20. Daniel 5:20. Of course, Nebuchadnezzar here. But when his heart was lifted up, and his mind hardened in pride. You can't separate the mind from the heart. They're not necessarily the same, however, they act sooner or later in step. Mind hardened in pride. He was deposed from his kingly throne, and they took his glory from him. Zechariah 7:11. Nobody knows what a 7-Eleven is anymore, but we do, but Zechariah 7:11. But they refused to hearken, and pulled away the shoulder, and stopped their ears, that they should not hear. Yea, they made their hearts as an adamant stone, lest they should hear the law and the words of the Lord of hosts. And the words of the Lord of hosts hath sent in his spirit by the former prophets. Therefore came great wrath from the Lord of hosts. So this hard heart has to do with this, not listening to God. They didn't want to hear what he had to say. It's not that they didn't want to hear. They already knew what he was going to say. So they hardened their heart and shut their ears so it wouldn't enter. People do that. I know y'all are all here too spiritual to do this, but after you've been saved a while, and you kind of know what page you're going to be on next when you're reading your Bible, and you know what's coming up. And if you got a bad attitude, you know what's going to be on that next page is going to reprimand you. You find another place to read. That's that closing your ears. That's avoiding hearing what you know is there, but it doesn't avoid it. God has already noted it. He did with these people right there. Matthew 13, verse 15. Jesus says, for this people's heart is waxed gross. So his idea of a hard heart is that it's gross. And their ears are dull of hearing, and their eyes they have closed, lest at any time they should see with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and should understand with their heart, and should be converted, and I should heal them. So they don't want to be healed. They know the process, and they're trying to do everything they can to avoid it. And that's what's going on. He shows up to the man at the well where the guy's trying to get into the water to get healed. And Jesus shows up before the man can get down there, and he says, do you want to be made whole? Well, that's a good question, because what Jesus said in our verse right here is many did not. They were hardening themselves against God, and he couldn't heal them because they didn't want to be healed. Romans 2, verse 5. Romans 2, verse 5. Romans chapter 1 is rough, but Romans chapter 2 is about as rough. Romans 2, verse 5. He says, but after thy hardness and impenitent heart, impenitent, that means nothing can penetrate it. Impenitent heart, treasures up unto thyself wrath against the day of wrath, and revelation of the righteous judgment of God. A heart is supposed to remain soft so that God can put in it what he wants there. However, if it gets hard, the only way for God to work on that heart is to bust it, to shatter it, and that's what he'll do. He said in our verse there in Hebrews 3, he says in verse 8, he said, harden not your hearts as in the provocation in the day of temptation in the wilderness. That day of temptation, that's a long day, 40 years. He calls it a day of temptation. We would say it this way, that time of such and such. That's the way he's using it. Exodus 17. Here's where they tempt God. Exodus 17:7. And he called 17:7. Exodus 17:7. And he called the name of the place Massa and Meribah, because of the chiding of the children of Israel. Chiding, that's complaining and arguing and bickering of the children of Israel. And because they tempted the Lord, here's how they tempt him, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? Now, we got to think about that. It sounds like they're asking for the right thing. Is there God here? Is not David walks up and down the trench when Goliath is out there, and he says something similar. However, it's the attitude behind it. The attitude behind it is this: if God was really here, we wouldn't have trouble. Hmm. No, a lot of times God uses the trouble to point you to a clearer picture of Him, and that's what He was doing. He said right there they tempted Him when they did that. So tempting usually starts this way: complaining, chiding. You know what chiding is? It's childish. It's easy to act like a child, want your way all the time, and complain about things that don't seem right. Now, for us, we wouldn't do any better than they did. They needed water. You know, we need water too. In America, we've got it so good, I don't think we would have to complain about water. Now, I have from time to time when we ran out of the rich water, rich people water. However, that's not really any big deal. We've got a tap. When I was a kid, you used the tap. I can't do that anymore, but there's those people down in Mexico who had to use bottled water, but now we like it out of the bottle. However, there they didn't have a grocery store they could run down to. There was no water. That's a necessity. And what they're saying is God must not be guiding us if there's no water here. That's a necessity. Hmm. He said what they did when they did that was tempt me. Ooh, not good. Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. Yes. hmm Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. Yeah, it's like they're saying, you know, he's not here because he would meet our needs, and we view this as a need. Hmm. Rather than just ask him, Lord, we need some water. Would you help us? Yeah. Say what you mean. Deuteronomy 6, verse 16. You shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him in Massa. Points them right there. God holds a grudge from time to time. And that's one of the times that he notes that he held a grudge against those people. Psalm 78, verse 18. Here's another time they tempted him. Psalm 78, verse 18. And they tempted God in their heart by asking meat for their lust. That is, they didn't have to have meat, they had manna. They just wanted something different. They had a hankering for something, quail. They had a hankering for something different. They just preferred, I'm sick of eating the same thing every day. Sure would be good if we had some salmon up in here. So that's it. He said right there, they tempted God. Now notice how they did it. They did it subtly. They did it the same way we do. They tempted God in their heart. They were smart. They didn't verbalize it. It's just that heart was thinking and moving in a direction, and God saw it, and it was blaring clear to him as though they had spoke it. Look at it in Psalm 106, Psalm 106, verse 14. Psalm 106, verse 14. But lusted exceedingly in the wilderness and tempted God in the desert. So, what's lust? The world thinks lust means sexual, and it does, but there's more to it than that. Lust simply means to want something you don't have. That's why it's very dangerous, and everybody has to deal with it. That we don't have what we should have, and what we do have is something that is not fair. It's not accurate to our circumstance. God wouldn't do something like that. What he's saying here is that's that heart wanting something different than what they had been given by God. So as we go through life, whatever it is we get is the thing God has given us. Otherwise, he's not really God. He's controlled every circumstance of your life. Therefore, where you are and everything you have is what he provided. He says in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 9. Now he's jumped dispensation. This is 100% church age to you and I. And he's bringing up the same argument God's been using nonstop in the Old Testament. 1 Corinthians 10, verse 9. Neither let us tempt Christ, as some of them also tempted and were destroyed of serpents. Notice the destruction there is death. They were bitten by a serpent and died. We're going to need to remember that because soon we're going to make an analogy to something he says here, and I'll bring it back up when we get there. Now, he said that time period that they were testing him and tempted him in the wilderness was 40 years. I think God knows how long it was. You don't need to question it. He says that was a generation. Now, he didn't say, here's a tricky thing, he did not say 40 years is a generation. He said that generation tempted me for 40 years. There's a little difference in that. Numbers 14, verse 33. He says, and your children shall wander in the wilderness 40 years. That's how long they're wandering, 40 years. And bear your whoredoms until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. Deuteronomy 8, verse 2. There's something to this because God keeps putting it in the Bible so many times he wants us to notice it. It may just be he's trying to get us accustomed to the number 40, but he says it over and over. Deuteronomy 8, verse 2. And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee, to prove thee, to know what was in thine heart, whether thou wouldest keep his commandments or no. We would say or not. But he's just identified the way they speak. No. When he tells you to do something, the command, and then their response was no. Deuteronomy 8, verse 4. Thy raiment wax not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Keeps reminding them of that 40 years. You'll get the point to why I'm doing this at the end, I think. Joshua 5, verse 6. Joshua 5, verse 6. He says, for the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people that were men of war, which came out of Egypt, were consumed, because they obeyed not the voice of the Lord, unto whom the Lord sware that he would not show them the land which the Lord sware unto their fathers that he would give us, and the land that floweth with milk and honey. So forth, so on. He's saying this is the 40-year mark, and he's just reiterating it. Look at it in Amos 2, verse 10. Amos 2:10. Also I brought you up from the land of Egypt, and led you 40 years through the wilderness, to possess the land of the Amorites. 40 years again. Acts 7, verse 36. Acts 7:36. Acts 7, verse 36. He brought them out after that he had showed wonders and signs in the land of Egypt, in the Red Sea, and in the wilderness 40 years. Acts 13, verse 8. That's not it. Maybe it's 18. What's Acts 13, 18?
40 years.
Yeah. Acts 13, 18. 40 years again. Man, I missed the verse. Maybe we'll pick it up in another section. But you're going to find two different time periods given. One is 38 years and one is 40. And there's a apparent contradiction that you have to reconcile. And I don't know why I didn't put the verse in here. Maybe I put it in another section of these notes, but we'll get to it at some point. We'll cover that when we get to it. But that's something to think about, and you can look it up if I don't find it in a minute. Hebrews 3, verse 10. Hebrews 3, verse 10. He says, "Wherefore I was grieved with that generation and said, they do always err in their hearts, and they have not known my ways." God pointing that finger at the heart again. We think of the Old Testament as being commandments, actions, but the action had to be connected to the heart too. It was not 100% based on works in the Old Testament, because if it was just based on works, God wouldn't keep pointing at the heart. So there had to be some faith and some belief in what God had said. Otherwise, they wouldn't have done the action. He says, "Wherefore he was grieved with that generation." That's the generation that was wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. And of course, there were some exceptions to that generation. Joshua and Caleb got to go through, even though they were part of the original generation. And if anybody else besides Joshua and Caleb weren't lined up against God, they would have been able to get in too. However, he said, "I'm cut and dry about this thing. When the heart turns hard, I destroy for it." And so he genocide a whole generation for that very thing. Rebellion. The error is in the heart. They have not known my ways, is what he said. That is, they should have known me by now. Now, he took them through Egypt, doing one miracle after the next, deposing a king who was a despot and a ruler over them. And that should have told them who he is. And then they go out in the wilderness, and then they start thinking they can tell God what they're going to do and not do. And it don't work that way. Get in Hebrews 3:12. Hebrews 3:12. He says, "Take heed, brethren, lest there be in any of you an evil heart of unbelief in departing from the living God." Same context. That bad, hard heart is this, an evil heart. He's connected it with not believing or departing from God. We could do that. I mean, to some degree. Psalm 78, verse 8. Psalm 78, verse 8. "And might not be as their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that set not their heart aright, and whose spirit was not steadfast with God." Now he's connected another element to it, the heart and the spirit. The spirit, that's we use it another way. We use it, well, the spirit of the place. That is, you can feel it. It's an influence. He says right there, when the heart goes bad, the spirit does too. And he connected it with evil. Now, the Bible has another term for that called evil spirits. People say that a Christian cannot be possessed. Baloney. Christian means you are possessed of God. If you can be possessed of God, you could also be possessed of the devil. Sure. You could do both. The flesh, Paul says, "In me, that is in my flesh, dwelleth no good thing." Sure. That hard heart is an invite to an evil spirit to come in. Whew. Better stop. We're going to get to preaching in a minute. Isaiah 28. Isaiah 28, verse 7. Isaiah 28, verse 7. You can't talk about a wicked heart, rebellion, and evil spirits without mentioning the spirit most people are addicted to. Isaiah 28, 7. But they also have erred through wine and through strong drink and are out of the way. The priests and the prophets have erred through strong drink. They are swallowed up of wine. They are out of the way through strong drink. They err in vision. They stumble in judgment. That's that wicked spirit. It comes along, it's called spirits. And when it enters a man, it says it consumes the man. They're consumed of wine. That is, the wine took a drink of them. They entered the man. And it changes the spirit. Hosea 4, verse 12. Hosea 4, verse 12. Now, they should have known the ways of God. They were the only nation given his commandments. No excuse for that. But here's what happens. Hosea 4:12. My people ask counsel at their stocks. That is, they pick up a stick and ask it, what should I do? we have people that do that in modern times. I would say you open the newspaper and look at the stock exchange. Nobody opens the newspaper anymore. You peck on the keyboard and look at the stock exchange. The stock exchange doesn't tell you much. I can't figure that thing out. Seems like when things are going good, the stock market's dropping, and when things are going bad, the stock market's going up. I guess it depends on how rich you are. But he says, stocks. If your hope is in stocks, you got problems. Now, the stock there, of course, is a graven image that they've carved out. And their staff declare unto them, for the spirit of whoredoms hath caused them to err, and they've gone a whoring from under their God. That is, looking to anything else for the answer. That is, God has an answer for the Christian. God had an answer for the nation. The nation was supposed to depend on him. As a Christian, our job is to look to him for answers. If he says, go see that person, go to that bank and get a loan, then we do it. But we don't go there first and then ask him to come along, which is what most people do. Look at it in John 3, verse 19. John 3, verse 19. Jesus speaking, he says, and this is the condemnation, that light is come into the world, and men love darkness rather than light, because their deeds were evil. So all of that evil spirit, wicked spirit, rebellion, hard heart, all that stuff starts making you become accustomed to evil until you get addicted to it. And he said, when light shows up, that's repulsive to you. And people won't come to light because they become so accustomed to the darkness. We know that's true. We've got our bedroom is in the middle of the house. We have two doors, door on each side. No windows. We can close those doors, and it's pitch black in there. So you close those doors, and then you wake up at noon when you think it's 7 in the morning, and you walk out of that room, and it's bright light. It hurts your eyes. Now that's the same thing in the spirit realm. Men get accustomed to the darkness, and the light hurts. It repels them. Oh, they don't want that much light all at once. Look at it in John 8, verse 45. John 8, verse 45. Here's that repulsion in action. He says, Jesus speaking, and because I tell you the truth, that's pure light, ye believe me not. That is, he just put a 5,000 watt beam on them, and they turned their head and ran the other way, like little roaches scurrying for the darkness. Romans 1:28, he says this, And even as they did not like to retain God in their knowledge, God gave them over to a reprobate mind to do those things which were not convenient. That is, they had God and they didn't want to keep him in their mind. It said retain. They did not like to retain God in their knowledge. Retain means that you were holding it. And you said, let me get rid of this. It's a hot potato. I got to drop that. Ooh. So that could apply to Christians. Some people says, you'll know in this chapter, it talks about sexual perversion. And they say, could you be a homosexual and be a Christian? Sure you could. Right there's where he's talking about. Those are people who had God and didn't want to retain it. Sure. Christian can get involved in the same wickedness as the lost world. Second Thessalonians 2:10, he says this, and with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they receive not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Christians are supposed to love truth. Truth is what set us free. Truth is what gives you salvation. Jesus shows up and he says, I am the way, the truth. There it is, the life. Now, he says these people didn't love truth. Christians should love truth. The devil knows that, and so he gives them a counterfeit of truth. You know what the counterfeit of truth is? Conspiracy theories. I'll give you the truth on why this is all messed up. If it's not from God, don't hold it too tightly. Truth comes from the Bible. Okay? Well, don't let the devil show up as an angel of light appearing as though he's going to give you truth. He says, verse 11, for this cause God shall send them strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that they all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. All right, we made it through one verse without preaching too much. Hebrews 3, verse 11. Hebrews 3, verse 11. Now he's about to open up a doctrinal can of worms that's going to last for hours and hours. So I'll just shortcut it and give you a little bit of this. And then we'll delve in deeper. He says, so I swear in my wrath, they shall not enter into my rest. So now we're going to get a discourse on the children of Israel that were wandering for 40 years. He said right here, he identified it. They were wandering 40 years because I wanted to kill them off, because if I didn't, they would enter into rest. That is, they would enter into Canaan. They would get the land. And God's point of view of them getting into the land was they would rest. Now, that rest is a little funny rest. You read the book of Joshua and you find out what God was considered rest. Go conquer that territory. Go conquer that territory. Joshua says at the end, there's still much more land to go get. Okay, well, God was calling that rest. Rest didn't mean do nothing.
As you were talking about situational David,
Mm-hmm.
they had victory after victory
Mm-hmm.
after victory.
Right. Yes.
And it was not a struggle bus.
Right.
And in that way, I would consider that rest.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Rest doesn't mean lack of activity, because they sure had a lot of it. But in comparison. Okay, so that's the rest. And he's identified it. Context is the children of Israel in the wilderness, and we'll need that. And we'll probably better stop it there. What time? Well, yeah, we better stop it there. I'll pick that up. We'll start again on chapter 3, verse 11, because I'm going to delve into all these. Going to give you 4 different rests between this chapter and the next one, and they all are a different type and different dispensation. And so we need to identify those and all of the things that surround it and understand exactly what he's saying. I'll also give you the ideas that other people have of the interpretations of these, so that you can decide for yourself. Okay, we'll pick up there next week at Hebrews 3:11.